All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first YouTube Live with Luchi and Muttons. Uh, wow. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited about this. Let's wait for a few seconds for a couple more people to join. Um, and yeah, we can get started. Um, so, for those of you who don't know me and have found me somewhere somehow, I am Surabhi. I run Luchi and Mutton's Dog Behavior and Nutrition, which is a behavior and nutrition practice based out of India. And I work virtually with dog parents across the world to help them meet their dogs' nutrition and behavior needs. You can find me on Instagram, on Facebook, obviously on YouTube, and you can also find me on Spotify. I run a podcast called the Luchi and Muttons podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as well. Thank you so much for being here on the first YouTube Live. I wanted to do this for a couple of different reasons. One was, a couple of weeks ago on Instagram, I sort of reached out to, community members to get a sense of what is the best way that they would like to consume long format content. And some of the responses that came in had to do with both podcasts as well as videos. And I thought that a YouTube Live would be a great way to do it. My colleague Saujanya from the Dog Promise has also been doing this, has been doing these quite regularly, and she's absolutely brilliant at it. So I was inspired by that too. And of course, I have been one of the ways that I cope very actively with grief, I suppose, is by immersing myself in work. And so this became another way to do something on weeknights. Um, and so, yeah, that's really how the YouTube Live sort of came together. I intend to do this about twice a month. So the first and the third Thursdays of the month at 8:30 p.m. IST. And of course, for those of you who can join in live, that'll be amazing. But for those of you who can't, I will anyway be sharing the YouTube link with you all, and you can always watch it later at your convenience. So the way that I sort of want to do this is essentially, pick up a few topics that make for interesting conversation, that make for interesting nuggets of insight to be shared on. And hopefully, as we sort of get into the groove of these things and get into the rhythm of this, you will have recommendations as well. And, you can send them in to me on Instagram or Facebook, or just leave your suggestions in the comments under each live video, and we can work with those as well. But net, I'm looking at this as a space to pick up, definitely one topic in canine nutrition, another topic in canine behavior. That way, different people who are coming in for different requirements can find value. And so today I have wow, I think I'm a little nervous. It's quite interesting to do this without like an audience staring back at you, and so I'm just like finding different things to put my focus on. But yes, if you are here, please drop me a hi and let me know that you're around and listening, and that's always very comforting and supportive. But yeah, today I have a couple of interesting topics that I wanted to sort of talk about. These have been things that have been on my mind for a while now. And I thought it's a great way to kickstart the YouTube Live this way. So, three things that I'm going to be spending time today talking about. One is just life after Luchi and Mutton. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Luchi and Mutton are my two dogs. They're the inspiration for Luchi and Muttons in general, the brand that I built. I lost Button in October 2023, and unfortunately, Luchi passed away a little less than a week ago. And so it's been an interesting, intense hard journey the last 4 months, and so I have a lot of different reflections that I thought I can share with everyone here. So that's one topic. Then the other one is just sort of looking at body weight and body condition score as health indicators for dogs. And as a nutrition consultant myself, I do use them, but I also have a couple of concerns with using them, and I thought that I could, sort of put those out as well and hear what you all have to say about those. And then the last topic for today is really deep diving a little bit into walking equipment for reactive dogs. And this one was interesting. It came up because I saw a couple of different questions in a couple of different groups that I was part of. And I thought that it was worth addressing in a conversational manner. So again, if you're around and you have thoughts and questions and comments and experiences that you'd like to share, then 100% put those into the comments, either while you're attending live or post whenever you see it later. All right. So let's get right into it. Let's start with body weight and body condition score as health indicators. So obviously, when you're sort of working with a vet or a nutrition consultant to design a diet that is, catering to your dog's needs, there are a bunch of different parameters that you are going to take into account. Two of them being body weight and body condition score. So body weight, fairly straightforward. And the way that one would essentially look at body weight is really to look at, on average, what would a particular breed of a particular gender of an age potentially weigh, right? So, on average, I would have, let's say, a guideline or a guiding number to, how much should a male German Shepherd adult dog weigh? How much should a female Rottweiler adult dog weigh, right? And so that becomes a little bit of a benchmark so as to compare, individual dogs' weights to. And so that gives me a sense of whether, an individual dog is at the right weight, underweight, overweight, whatever it may be, right? And so, again, there are usually there all of this information is fairly available in the form of, even your American kennel clubs and other kennel clubs sort of issuing documentation on this. And so the generalized weights, the average weights are roughly documented well enough and easily accessible. And so that really becomes a benchmark to compare your individual dog's weight to. So that is one parameter. The other one is something called the body condition score. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, the body condition score is a chart that is essentially representative of different shapes of a dog's body. So usually the chart is ranked between 1 to 5, 1 to 7, 1 to 9. And there are variations of it. And essentially, based on the dog's appearance, you would rate the dog on this chart. So the lower scores mean that the dog is seemingly underweight, because again, a lot of the assessment is based on visual assessment, visual and certain tactile markers. And the higher the score means that the dog is seemingly overweight or even obese. And so, for example, the way that you would make that visual assessment is, on your dog, are you able to, let's say, see their ribs? Are you able to feel their ribs? When you look at your dog from a top view, are you able to see a well-defined curvature to the waist hip line? Are you seeing that they have an extremely narrow waistline? Those are some of the parameters with which you would evaluate your dog's shape and consequently your dog's body condition. And so that is definitely a big indicator, big parameter that is used to really assess overall a dog's shape and weight. And again, especially with obese dogs, 100%. And so that's really where the conversation about keeping your dogs lean comes from. What does lean look like? You refer to the body condition score for that. And so, of course, as a nutrition consultant, I use these two parameters as well. but I do have a couple of different issues with them. And so I'm going to get into a little bit of those. And again, if you're around and some of these resonate with you, then please feel free to add that to the comments here as well. So one, I think with body weight, I think that the issue with body weight becomes that we assume there is a huge assumption that this particular dog of this breed, of this gender, of this age should weigh somewhere around this number. And I have seen individual clients, but I have also seen vets get extremely obsessive about that number, and to me, that's a little bit of a problem for two reasons. One, I think in general, I think um, you know a lot of our relationship, a lot of the human relationship with food and with eating and with diet culture is extremely disordered. It's not very positive. It is very toxic. Um, and I think a lot of that does flow into the way that we see food, the way that we see our dog's health, the kind of emphasis we place on diet alone as opposed to other parameters and aspects of their well-being. And so I have seen dog parents get extremely paranoid, obsessed about the number on that weighing scale. Um, and I think there is that aspect to sort of explore and support and unpack. But I think what's also important to remember is, at least in the context of India, and that's where I'm going to speak to for most part, I don't think we have any longer 100% purebred dogs. I think that a lot of the dogs, even those dogs who, in the guise of purebred dogs, are largely mixed breeds, right? And again, if you would see, the whole idea with DNA testing, and see results with different dogs, you'll find that a lot of these dogs do have traits, genetic traits of different breeds in them. And so, your Labrador is likely to have DNA makeup of different breeds across their ancestry. And so the dog that you actually have isn't necessarily a purebred dog. And so when we look at these generic weight measurements, when we look at these genetic weight guidelines for breeds, I don't think they take into account uh, that 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 complexity of the DNA makeup. I don't think they take into account the complexity of the fact that this dog could have multiple different breeds in them. And the reason why this is important is because when you have this kind of mixed genetic makeup, it does obviously influence so many things about your life, so many things about how you show up, so many things about your physiology. So you could be a Labrador, but you could have the appetite or the digestive system of another breed altogether. And so that could be true for different dogs as well. You could have the build and the makeup, or you could have the build and the makeup of different breeds, just and could be very different from the breed that you're actually looking like. And so I think that when we focus so much on just weight numbers, we don't take into account some of this complexity. Um, and what tends to happen as a result of that is, I think we end up putting an incredible amount of pressure. We end up taking an incredible amount of stress to try and get to that particular number. And again, I've seen this in both in both cases, where dogs are underweight, and where dogs are also overweight, where dog parents can get extremely worried, and rightly so, but can get extremely worried about that number, and they put themselves through a lot of stress, they put the dog through a lot of stress. It's just very, very stressful. So I think, body weight alone singularly is definitely not a marker, an indicator of health at all. And so I would be wary of using that singularly as a way to tell me if my dog is healthy or not. um with body condition score, and I think that's really where the body condition score also kicked in, right? Because I think it became understood that looking at just body weight alone for dogs wasn't necessarily a reliable marker, and we needed something more to be able to balance that, to be able to add as extra data point. And so that's really why the body condition score came into place. And, the body condition score is also helpful in certain ways because, for example, if I see a dog who is underweight on the weighing scale as per the guidelines and numbers, but I'm able to make a visual assessment and I find that the dog looks lean, the dog actually weighs somewhere in the middle on this body condition score, then I can balance off the weight that I am seeing to saying, okay, but the dog is looking healthy. So maybe this is just a little bit of the up and down of the weight, so as to speak. And so I think that's where the body condition score becomes an extra data point that can be helpful. But I think that the body condition score is also problematic because it entirely relies on visual assessment. And and I think that anything to do with visual assessment, anything to do with visual perception, also comes with a lot of bias that we carry, like that the perceiver carries, right? And so, you know, I could I could assess a dog visually and say, hey, actually I can see the ribs, but there seems to be a decent layer of fat on it. And someone else could also visually assess that dog and say, listen, this dog is distinctly underweight and needs to definitely put on more weight. um, and I also see that on the higher end of the body condition score, which is where, you know, if I'm not able to necessarily feel the ribs on a dog's side, I could say, listen, this dog is overweight, this dog is at risk of being obese. And someone else could make that visual assessment and say, actually, I can feel the ribs a little bit, and I don't think that the dog is overweight and obese. And I'm calling these discrepancies out because these do happen. And I think that that is a big challenge with the body condition score, that visual assessment is still subjective. Um, and we can get, again, I think in anything to do with what I found with dog nutrition, anything when it comes down to feeding our dogs, I think in general we can get quite obsessive, sometimes even to the point of being really anal about our dog's diet and what it means for their health. Um, and again, I think the equivalent, and it's not an exact equivalent, right? But I think the equivalent that I think of in human beings is the whole idea of BMI, your body mass index, and how that was, how certain numbers and certain ranges on the BMI were determined to say you have a healthy body and you are a healthy person. Uh, but there is also now a lot of criticism, a lot of critique about using BMI as an indicator of health because it has been found. I think there is, I think there is now this understanding and there is now this acceptance and acknowledgement that every body is so unique and every body is so individualistic that random generic numbers cannot in any shape and form determine the health of such a diverse population. That's true for human beings. That's also true for dogs, right? But also now we see that, just talking about BMI, we see that there are a lot of negative, toxic conversations when it comes to BMI, and a lot of the times healthcare professionals or um, fitness professionals or human nutrition professionals do end up leveraging that to promote a very poor body image, to promote very poor body positivity, a lot of body hate for individual clients. And so there is that growing understanding that every body is very unique and individual, right? And I think that that is absolutely true for our dogs as well. um, and it's so interesting that I was reading up something today about, and it was a human nutrition piece, but I thought that was so relevant to even our dogs. And it said that, weight health is about healthy behaviors, right? And so when I talk about when I talk about what does good health look like, are you a healthy individual? Essentially, I'm trying to gauge, what are things that you're doing to maintain, preserve, optimize your health, right? And so, what are behaviors one is engaging in? And so, this person talked about, health is about healthy behaviors, and weight is not a behavior. um, and I thought that was so powerful and so important, um, because weight isn't a behavior, right? And so I think that when we look at our dog's health as well, I think there is 100% a need to see it extremely holistically, to go beyond the weighing scale, to go beyond the look and the appearance of your dog, and to really see how the dog is doing in all different aspects of what that health looks like, right? And I think, again, taking from this quote, I think thinking about, um, do we have healthy routines in place? Do we have uh, in place, if we've made enough provisions for dogs to engage in behaviors that do actually contribute positively to their health, as opposed to just getting obsessed about a number, right? Whether that's on the weighing scale, whether that's on the body condition score. Um, and again, I think about Luchi, for example. Uh, and for the longest time, when she was with us, when she came to us, and up until about a year and a half, yeah, probably a little bit more than that, a year and a half ago, she was she was underweight. I would place her extremely low on the body condition score. I would place her extremely low. I mean, she was definitely 6 kgs, 7 kgs underweight than what a boxer of her age and gender should have been. Um, and it wasn't a diet related issue at all, because she ate uh, appropriate quantities. She moved around enough. Um, I think it just honestly came down to, I mean, again, in her context, I think there were a couple of things that were interfering in her being able to gain weight. Um, but it wasn't a diet related condition. It wasn't a food related condition. And I think in my journey with her in the first year of sort of trying to figure this out, I was growing extremely obsessed and frustrated with the fact that she was not putting on weight. And that's when I had to really step back and think about other behaviors and see her health very holistically, and take a call whether are these really the right indicators for her health, because she was fine. She was absolutely fine on all other fronts. And so, I think that I think that, again, and in no way and form am I saying that this means that dogs need to be overweight, or dogs need to be obese, or dogs shouldn't be lean. Absolutely not, right? But I think it's important for us to remember that every dog is an individual. And so, what health looks like, especially when we're looking at weight and shape, for each dog will look very, very different. Um, and I think to use generic, guidelines to arrive at that understanding is just, it doesn't do justice, right? Because when we are looking at individual dogs, we have to consider things like, you know, were they the runt of the litter? Did they have access? Did they have timely access to their mother's milk well enough? Are they struggling with poor immunity for a very long time? Are there issues that are interfering with them being able to put on weight? What is their build? What is their frame? Because even amongst breeds, you will have dogs of different builds and different frames, and not all of them will look the same. And so I think there is a lot of uniqueness to each dog that one must consider. And so I think that, as you are thinking about your dog's health, um, I wouldn't completely disregard body weight and body condition score, because again, in the absence of other parameters, I think it does become hard, and I face that personally as a practicing consultant. Uh, but I would not I would not make it feel and make it become like the end all and be all of our dog's health. I think it's a very, very, very tiny part um, to getting a sense of where our dogs are at. And so I would definitely look at a more holistic view of that. And of course, if you have a dog who's struggling to lose weight, to put on weight, uh, in almost every case there is a larger issue that's going on that has nothing to do with the diet, that has nothing to do with just increasing quantities of food, which again is a recommendation. Increasing quantities, decreasing quantities of food, which again are recommendations that are very, very widely made. There are usually other underlying things at play, which I think is helpful to unpack with either a behavior consultant or a holistic veterinarian or even a nutrition consultant. Um, so, yeah, those were my thoughts on body weight and BCS as health indicators. Um, I'm going to take a quick pause just to see any comments, questions that might have come in, anything that people would like to share. Hi, Chandni. Thank you for joining. Um, that's very interesting. Yes, I am. I hope, I'm glad that it was interesting, and I hope that some parts of it resonated. I'll just wait for a few seconds if there are any more questions or thoughts on body weight and BCS before I move to the next bit. Okay, awesome. Okay, so moving on to the next topic for our live today. Um, I wanted to talk about walking equipment for reactive dogs. Uh, and so I obviously feel very strongly and passionately about reactivity in dogs. Um, and, 80% of the clients that I work with come to me because their dogs do struggle with reactive behaviors. So it is something that I'm obviously very um, familiar familiar with, both personally as well as through my work. And I wanted to talk about this primarily because I came across a couple of questions in a group that I'm part of. Um, and I thought it was really interesting, the context of those questions. And one of them I can definitely put up here. Yeah. Okay, so somebody posted this question on a group. My dog has a martingale collar, but the shelter pushed us to use a harness. I'm wondering, since he's a puller and a very reactive dog, would it be better to start clipping his leash to the martingale? Um, and I think, unfortunately, yeah, sorry, I think because of the word limit on StreamYard, I wasn't able to complete the full question. So the full question was, my dog has a martingale collar, but since he's a puller and a very reactive dog, would it be better to start clipping his leash to the martingale and maybe a backup clip to the harness in case he escapes? Is there any risk to their neck if he's a lunger? So that was the full question. And then there was another question, and this is a little bit of a mouthful, but I'm gonna go for it. I'm feeling a bit frustrated regarding equipment lately. We've had our dog since April, and she pulls on her leash aggressively, as well as being excitement reactive to other dogs. If I have her on a flat collar, she chokes herself very heavily to the point that I worry about her breathing. When I tried a head harness, she obviously had sinus pain for a day or two afterwards, so I stopped that. I had been using a front pull harness, but now I'm reading that they are awful for their muscular structure. Given her neck sensitivity and my lack of experience, I'm not happy with the idea of a slip, martingale, choke, or prong collar. Does anyone else feel like there is literally no equipment out there that is safe for walking with? It seems like the only way to not harm them is to either have them be perfect dogs or not walk them anymore. Um, and I saw this question and my heart broke because it is so hard walking a dog with reactivity. Mutton was, obviously a formerly reactive dog, and I call her a formerly reactive dog because I think she reached a point where she wasn't as reactive. But in the early days that she was with us, and she would pull on the leash, she would react to everything on the road. Um, she would, I mean, she would pull so hard that there were days that I sort of just fell walking, and I would, sit in the middle of the road and just bawl my eyes out because it was just so painful to walk her. And I think that I echo with I resonate with the sentiment because I think I reached that point where I just didn't want to walk her anymore. And I didn't want to be outdoors with her anymore, and that was really heartbreaking. And so, I wanted to take these two questions because, again, I think that a lot of the times when we are working with reactive dogs, uh, we look at fixing reactive behaviors. We look at fixing behaviors that we're seeing are a problem. Um, and we don't necessarily take a holistic approach to it. And I find that to be a big gap in the way that we address reactivity in dogs. And so, these are obviously just two questions that are examples, but I've seen this quite extensively that when we think about walking a reactive dog, I think there is a lot of reliance and I think hope that we put on equipment to fix the behavior that we're seeing with the dog, right? Now, I'm obviously an ethical and humane and force free dog behavior consultant. So I'm not even going to get into that space of using choke collars or prong collars or shock collars while walking dogs. That's not a conversation I am going to necessarily have at this point in time, at least in the life. Uh, but but I think that when we are walking a reactive dog, when we are looking to fix these behaviors, and when we are thinking of equipment that can help us fix these behaviors, I think I think it's important for us to admit that we pick equipment that works for us. We don't pick equipment that is right for the dog. And so, whether any form of collar, right? Any form of collar, even if it's a flat collar, the reason why one would prefer or one would be more comfortable walking a reactive dog on a collar is because if the dog lunges, if the dog barks, you can pull and tighten the leash and cause that unpleasantness, right? We are hoping that the dog experiences that unpleasantness when that collar pulls against their neck to stop that behavior. Because without that learning principle in place, those collars don't work at all. The idea of how a collar could be effective for a reactive dog goes out of the window. The learning principle is based on that collar causing that unpleasantness to the neck. And that is not fixing reactive behavior. That is not taking care of the dog's internal state. That is not addressing reactivity at all, right? That is putting an extremely band-aid and a horrible band-aid solution to what you are seeing with your dog's behaviors. And in fact, what I have found is that when we don't use the right equipment for our dogs, when we don't use the right walking equipment for our dogs, and in general, reactive or non reactive, it can be extremely frustrating, it can be extremely stressful, and in so many cases, it can be extremely painful. And we see that even with the use of collars. And so I think it's helpful to remember that irrespective of whether your dog is reactive or non-reactive, to me, the walking equipment that is as safe as possible, and essentially uh, ergonomically helpful to the dog is a combination of a long leash and an H harness. Um, and again, I think the harnesses versus collars is a separate topic, which I'm not going to get into too much today. Um, but Bhag's Education, which is run by Sandur Pangal, has a fabulous playlist on ditching the collar and why the collar is not a good option for dogs, and just the different ways that it not only impacts the neck muscles for the dog, but also impacts all of the different organs that, sensitive organs that the neck is actually protecting. And then there is, of course, a ton of research that talks about even consistent use of the flat collar can cause skin issues and skin abrasions around the neck. In fact, a collar use has been identified as one of the primary causes for hypothyroidism in dogs as well, because the constant pull against the collar also starts suppressing the thyroid gland, and so there's just a ton of information out there that is genuinely available on the use of collars. And so I think a lot of the times people think, oh, but I'm not using, a choke collar, I'm not using a prong collar, I'm just using a martingale collar, or I'm just using a slip collar or a flat collar. But the principle is still the same. I am still approaching it with the lens of I in that if my dog engages in that reactive behavior, I can control that behavior, I can respond to that behavior by tugging hard enough for my dog to experience that unpleasantness and stop that behavior. And that is absolutely not going to help with your dog's reactivity. In fact, it's just going to cause a lot more pain, a lot more stress, a lot more frustration, like I said, and in all probability, going to simply exacerbate your dog's reactive behaviors. And so I think, coming back, I think one is, irrespective of whether your dog has reactive behaviors or not, the ergonomically safe and viable equipment for them is this combination of a long leash and an H harness that sits comfortably on their sternum, that allows full mobility of the shoulder, that keeps the neck safe from any use of equipment right there. But I also think that when it comes to dogs with reactivity, I think that we often again expect the equipment to fix the behavior, but that is not how reactivity works, right? And I was recently doing a conversation with Dr. Holly Trett at the Kino conference, and we were talking about reactivity in dogs, and if you start thinking about reactivity as a mental health condition, um, then you realize that these kind of equipments aren't really going to solve that mental health condition, because we have to address the inner state of the dog. We have to address the inner world of the dog. And equipments are not going to help us do that, which is why I find that a holistic approach like the one that I've articulated with the Luchi and Mutton's safety approach to dog reactivity is a really helpful, comprehensive one, because it does look at addressing dog reactivity in multiple different aspects, in multiple holistic ways. And so, when we are looking at walking reactive dogs, I think it's not just about the equipment, but it's also about where we're walking them. It's about how much we're walking them. It's about, how soon are we walking them with triggers? Are we offering opportunities for decompression? Are we offering opportunities to walk away from their potential triggers? Are we walking with a leash skillfully enough? Because and again, this is something that I just feel like it's not as simple as picking up a leash and just walking, right? Because remember, the leash is, I feel like the leash is, it's tethering the dog to you, you are being tethered to the dog. It still continues to be like a chain of communication between your dog and you. And it's not just about picking the leash and shortening it and walking with the dog, right? We can use the leash extremely responsibly. We can use the leash to communicate. We can use the leash to offer safety. We can use the leash to um, offer freedom to our dogs in so many different ways. But it is a skill to be learned. It is a skill to practice. Um, and I think that we have to be open to that. And so, again, in my consultations, when I have clients who come to me for very similar issues where they have a dog with extreme reactivity, who's also a luncher, who's also a leash puller, um, we do leash walking as a separate session altogether, which does contain a component of how do you just handle a loose leash, because it's not as simple as shortening and extending. There's just so much more to that. And so, I think that and I think that so when we look at these walks with reactive dogs, one, I think it's important for us to get the right equipment, which in irrespective of what is a harness on a long leash. Two is to approach reactivity very, very holistically, right? How your dog shows up outdoors is also a reflection of what their inner world is. And so, it's not just about my dog is great at home, but my dog has a hard time outdoors, right? It is about addressing both it is about addressing the inner world so that your dog can show up more consistently and more regulated, irrespective of where they are, and as much as they can. And so I think there is 100% a need to address that very holistically. And third, I think we do have to move beyond that mindset of the fact that equipment can fix my dog's behaviors, because they can't. And again, I think everything does really come down to how you use that equipment and how your dog feels around that equipment. And if you are using your equipment aversively and coercively, then that is not a pleasant experience. And if your dog is feeling uncomfortable, unpleasant, and just in discomfort with that equipment, then that's not working for them as well. So I think that's the way that I would address walks with reactive dogs. Honestly, I would definitely push to move beyond just figuring out an equipment that could help them, and really look at it from a very holistic point of view for sure. Um, all right. Okay, that was my second topic. I'm gonna wait and pause to see in case there are any comments. Any thoughts about, yeah, just walking equipment for reactive dogs? Anything coming in from folks who are tuned in? Awesome. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think I had one more thing that I wanted to say about this, and then it just completely escaped me. Okay, if it comes up, I will put it up as a comment for sure. Um, okay, I think I've got another comment. Sorry, I'm just, yeah, figuring out multiple screens. And okay, Johnny says, I totally resonated so much with that, given that Rico was also reactive and we were advised to use martingale and Halty. Oh, for some reason, I'm not able to see a full comment. Mm, okay, my guess is, I'm guessing that you are saying that you were also advised to use other equipment outside of a harness for your dog. But I do really want to know what your experience was, because for some reason, your comment is getting cut off right here. Okay, so maybe Chandni, you can put that in again, just so that I have full access to your comment. Oh yeah, but I remember now actually. Thanks for this, Chandni. So when it comes to equipment, one of the mistakes that I made very early on with Mutton was, she used to lunge excessively. She used to pull a lot. And I I started walking Luchi on a long leash. But I didn't know how to use the leash. I just would use it, uh, you know, as I thought one uses it. Just put it on the harness and then just walk, right? And then tighten the leash and shorten it as much as you need. There wasn't a rhythm and communication to it. So that's how I was using the leash. And so when I started walking Mutton and she started pulling, I found it very difficult to walk her on the long leash. And so for a couple of days, I moved her on a short leash, thinking that I would be able to maneuver some of the situations that we were getting in a little bit more easily. And I realized very, very quickly that the short leash was not a good idea at all because it was just frustrating her so much more. She was walking so much faster. I was walking so much faster. She was pulling even harder, if that's possible. And it was an absolute disaster. In fact, I found a lot more respite when I did move to the long leash, but obviously that had to be supported with supporting Mutton more holistically, and for me to learn how to use a long leash with her. Um, and of course, everything else to do with walks, just how to find the right safe environment for her, for myself, um, to be able to walk her. And so that's the example that I wanted to give where I have been there. I have been there in situations where we've had to figure out what is the right equipment to manage this behavior. And the equipment doesn't always have the answer to address your dog's inner world. So that does require just a little bit more of a comprehensive and holistic approach to that. Okay. All right. Unfortunately, Johnny's comment is cut off, but we can move forward. If another comment comes in, I will definitely pick that up. Ah, okay. I never got to the Chinese. Yeah, amazing. I never got to the Halty, didn't feel right, but the look in his eye when he pulled on the martingale for the first time was heartbreaking to witness and was enough for me to recycle the collar. Yep, absolutely. Oh my God. Um, yeah, I think, and I think the second question, right, here where this particular individual talks about just, even like a flat collar choking so much that you can hear your dog gasp for breath, you can hear your dog choke. Yeah, it's a horrible sight, and I think anybody who claims that that does not hurt, uh yeah, it hurts. It's hurtful, 100%. It's unpleasant. Like I don't have to be writhing in pain to feel unpleasantness or discomfort, right? I can just feel unpleasantness and discomfort and not want to feel it at all. And so it doesn't have to be on a pain scale, so as to speak. And only if I score high on pain scale does make me eligible to not experience that pain. I don't think it works like that at all. And yeah, um, I think this is also so true. I think just feeling betrayed by that advice because I think that's the problem, right? That I think so many of us, it's so hard because we work with professionals to be guided to do good by our dogs. And sometimes we don't get advice that's necessarily in the interest of dogs. And I think we start off wanting to repair and take care of our relationship, but I think unintentionally we end up uh, compromising trust, and that's always hard. That's always heartbreaking. But I think that when we find the answers and when we are willing to learn from them and show up for our dogs and offer them confidence that we are learning and that we want to do better, we want to do different, uh, they see that and they take us up on that, and they offer more trust, and they take that leap of faith, and that makes things a little less a little less difficult, I guess. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Janvi. I can imagine that being just a really hard time for sure, and just so much work to do post that to repair as well. So thank you for sharing that. Um, all right. On that note, I wanted to address the last topic for the live today, which is life after Luchi and Mutton. And the only reason I wanted to talk about this was because, uh, I did post last week when Luchi passed away, that she did pass away. And, this week I sort of come back into work. This is the first video experience that I'm doing after quite a while. And I just felt it would be really inauthentic to hold space with, you know, with y'all, and not talk about this loss, and not talk about how my days and life are different now. I thought it would be really inauthentic to, you know, go about a life like nothing had happened, and not acknowledge it. And so I just wanted to, I suppose, in the spirit of, I think, authenticity and honesty, I think just hold space uh, for a little bit of that conversation. Um, and yeah, and I think that's really where I think the idea of talking about this came from. Um, yeah, I think it's been an interesting. I have to give you a heads up. I use interesting when I don't have other words that come to mind. It's been an interesting few days. I definitely feel like I grieved Mutton's death very differently than I have grieved Luchi's. Uh, I think even in her dying days, I think Luchi gave us the gift of um, time, in a way that, because she was struggling with osteosarcoma, which is a form of bone cancer. She was, from the time that she was diagnosed, from the time that she sort of physically started showing symptoms, she had about 45 days till when she passed. And I think that in those 45 days, unfortunately, she did, deteriorate quite a bit day by day. And it had essentially gotten to a point where uh, she was around, but she wasn't really around. And so I think in that way, she sort of gave us the gift of grieving her early on through that process, so that when she did pass, it didn't feel like a jolt, I suppose. Because it did feel like that when Mutton passed. I think Mutton's passing was just very, very sudden, and I was not at all ready to even fathom the idea that she was going to pass. So, when she did, it was just like, oh my God, what has happened? And so I think that I grieve the two dogs very differently. I think I've spent the last month, honestly, just bawling and uh, breaking down and howling. And I think that after she passed, and when she passed, I did feel a little bit of peace come over me, because I think I saw her struggle quite a bit. I think she was in a lot of pain. And so I think she passed peacefully, and I think seeing her pass peacefully also brought a lot of peace to me. But I also think that it also brought a lot of numbness. And so I think I am still quite dissociated from a lot of my emotions about Luchi passing. And I think I just want to take a break from feeling so intensely. And so I'm just, focusing on work, I'm focusing on not spending too much time at home. Um, Stepping out, even if it is to work out of a cafe. But yeah, that's essentially how I'm sort of planning my life at this point in time. And I think it's really bittersweet because when I had both the dogs at home, my mobility was restricted and limited, spontaneity was restricted and limited. I don't have full-time help. I don't have I would we would have to leave the dogs in the care of someone at home. And so it always involved a lot of planning, and it always involved a lot of like logistics to take care of. And now I don't have to do that. I can basically just get up and go wherever I want, without thinking too much, without planning too much. Uh, and it's bittersweet. There is a thrill that comes with it. There is a little bit of freedom that comes with it. Uh, but unfortunately, it comes at the knowingness, that yeah, that they are not around. Uh, and so it's been a lot, and it's been intense. Um, but I think that my grief and my grieving with both Luchi and Mutton, I think um they've obviously taught me a lot of different things, but I think they've taught me a few things that I did want to sort of share in this space with you all. So again, for those of you watching live, but also for those of you who will watch this later, um, I think one is that grief has to be shared. It's not something that one can bear and experience alone. It is something that has to be shared. It has to be supported, and one has to grieve with community and communally, um, because it's too much otherwise. It's too much singularly to bear. And so I'm just really grateful for friends and family, who are physically close to me, but also long distance friends, uh, who are opening themselves up and inviting to be to take part in this grief, and to grieve with me, and who're opening up space for me to be distracted, who're opening up space for me to show up in whatever ways that I want. And I think that's just been really, really helpful. So I think that, and I think this has been it's been an interesting learning for me, because I think I always felt like one must grieve in silence and in isolation. And I think when Mutton passed, it was just so unbearable that I was like, there is no way that I can do this alone. So I think that for those of you who are in some journey, where grief may not be part of it, I think something just to hold on to is that I think it's important for it to be shared with people you feel safe around, and shared with people who can support you and help you through it, and offer what you need at that time. Um, uh, I think the second thing is, I think just how I think just anticipatory grief is also so strong, right? I think in general, we don't want to talk about death. We don't want to talk about grief. We don't want to talk about loss. These are things that we want to sort of shut down and suppress and not hold space for. These are things that, sound morbid, sound very negative, sound very pessimistic. Uh, but they are part of life, and they are inevitable. And I think that if we can hold more space for those conversations, I think it can seem less daunting. I think it's still painful, but I think It doesn't have to feel like something that one must go through alone. I think that also opens up the space for a lot of conversation on anticipatory grief. And I think, especially when Luchi passed, in the weeks leading up to that, there was just so much of that when we didn't have a diagnosis in place, when we did have a diagnosis, but it felt like we had a treatment plan in place that fell through, like all of it. I think there was just so much anticipatory grief all the time that was just so overwhelming. And I think in those moments, I think what one really wants to be able to do is to just say, I think that someone that I really love and someone who's really close to me and someone whom I can't imagine life without is no longer going to be around. And I just want to talk about how hurtful and painful and devastating that is. And I think that we need to offer space and to just be like, yes, it is devastating, as opposed to, you know, shutting that up and saying, hey, no, 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 let's not talk about it. Maybe that's not what's going to happen, and shy away from that conversation, you know. So I think that's the other thing that I learned. I think just the importance to have those conversations around death and grief, and um, whole space for that, for the anticipation of those. I think that was really helpful. Uh, Yeah, yeah. So those were some of the things that I wanted to share. I think I ended up rambling a little bit, but hopefully some parts of it made sense. And of course, I think if you're listening in and if you're somewhere in that journey and you'd like to catch up and talk and reach out, please feel free to do that. I'd be more than happy to lend you a listening ear, or just be there in whatever capacity possible. But thank you so much for listening in. That this is the end of the first YouTube live with Luchi Muttons. I hope that this was useful. I hope that this is helpful. If you have thoughts, if you have questions, if you have comments, if you have suggestions for what we should talk about in the next live, then please, please, please add those in. Would love to sort of just go through those and sort of co-create this space as much as possible. I'm just gonna pause and see if there are any more comments. Anybody would like to share any closing thoughts? Anything that comes up there? Uh, Chandni, thank you for sharing your journey, sending you a warm virtual hug. Thanks so much, Chandni. A warm virtual hug right back at you. Um, All right. Okay. With that, I think we're going to bring this to an end. Thank you so much for joining in. Hope you have a lovely day, a lovely week ahead. And I will see you again on the 21st of March. That's the third Thursday of the month, with another YouTube live. In the meantime, don't forget to catch up on the Luchi and Muttons podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. I released a new episode this week on understanding attachment styles in humans and dogs. This was a conversation with a psychotherapist. And it's a lovely, lovely conversation. It's filled with lots of incredible insights. So I hope that you enjoy that. And a new and exciting episode is also going to be out sometime next week. I am chatting with um, Helen Moore of Wholesome Canine, and we are talking about EFT and how that can be used for dogs. It's going to be an incredible conversation, so I can't wait for you all to hear that as well. So, yep, up until then, thank you so much. Have a lovely day, have a lovely week, and I will see you soon. Take care. Bye.